Hey, welcome back. I'm Ibnul J. Farabi, and this is Empire Builders, the Rise and Fall of Civilizations. You know, I was looking at some old family photos the other day, and it struck me how certain features get passed down. My father's smile, my grandmother's eyes. It's a beautiful thing, this genetic inheritance. But what if the thing being passed down wasn't just a smile, but a literal, physical flaw that became a symbol of power? And what if that symbol of power became so concentrated, so amplified with each generation, that it began to undermine the very dynasty it was meant to represent? That's not a hypothetical. It's the story of one of Europe's most powerful families, and a medical mystery wrapped in a political tragedy. This is the story of the Habsburg Jaw, and how a dynasty's obsession with bloodline doomed an empire. For nearly 6 centuries, the House of Habsburg wasn't just a royal family. It was a geopolitical institution. At their peak, they ruled an empire that stretched from the Philippines to Peru, from Vienna to the Netherlands. Their motto was Bellic Gerent Alii, to Felix Austria, Noob. Let others wage war. You, happy Austria, marry. And marry they did. This was their genius strategy, strategic matrimony, weaving a web of alliances through wedding vows instead of battlefield victories. They accumulated kingdoms not with armies, but with marriage contracts. But this strategy had a dark, biological underside. In their zeal to keep power within the family, to keep the bloodline pure, they began to marry closer and closer relatives. Uncles married nieces. First cousins married constantly. The family tree began to look less like a tree and more like a reef, looping back on itself. And with that closed genetic loop came consequences. The most visible, famous consequence was the Habsburg Jaw, clinically known as mandibular prognathism. It's a condition where the lower jaw severely protrudes beyond the upper jaw. But it was more than just an underbite. It often came with a thick, everted lower lip, a drooping nasal tip, and a general elongation of the face. Portraits from the 16th century onward show it clearly. It starts subtly with Maximilian I, becomes pronounced in Charles V, and reaches its almost cartoonish extreme in the late 17th century with Charles II of Spain. Now, here's the fascinating part. For centuries, this jaw was seen not as a deformity, but as a mark of distinction. It was the Habsburg look, a visual stamp of their divine right to rule, proof of their pure, untainted blood. They literally wore their inbreeding on their faces. But this badge of honor was, in reality, a ticking genetic time bomb. Because the jaw was just the tip of the iceberg, that same closed gene pool that amplified the jaw also concentrated a horrific catalog of other genetic disorders. We're talking about epilepsy, intellectual disability, severe physical infirmity, and a staggering rate of infant mortality. The family was plagued by what they called the royal melancholy, which was likely severe depression. And all of this culminates in the tragic figure of Charles II of Spain, the last of the Spanish Habsburg line. By the time Charles was born, the coefficient of inbreeding in his family was higher than if his parents had been siblings. His condition was devastating. He couldn't walk properly until he was 8. He couldn't chew. His tongue was so large he could barely speak. He was chronically ill, and despite being married twice, he was almost certainly impotent, unable to produce an heir. His courtiers called him El Hechizado, the bewitched. They blamed sorcery for his condition. But the real curse wasn't magic, it was mathematics. It was the inexorable logic of genetics that the Habsburgs, in their pursuit of dynastic purity, had ignored for 200 years. And this is where a family tragedy becomes an empire-ending crisis. Charles II was a living metaphor for the Spanish Empire itself, sickly, weak, and with no clear path forward. His reign was one of relentless decline. The economy was in shambles, the military was weak, and the government was paralyzed by court intrigue. All of Europe watched and waited for his death, knowing it would trigger a war over the succession. When he finally died in 1700, childless, he left a will that plunged Europe into the War of the Spanish Succession, a continent-wide conflict that lasted over a decade. The mighty Spanish Habsburg line, which had once bestrode the world, ended not with a bang, but with a whimper, with a king whose own body was a monument to his family's fatal flaw. The empire was carved up. The central lesson here is brutal. The Habsburgs, in trying to preserve their power by keeping it all in the family, genetically engineered their own collapse. They sacrificed biological resilience on the altar of dynastic purity. It makes me think about systems, you know? I'm an engineer by training, and we talk a lot about resilience. A resilient system has redundancy, diversity, feedback loops. It can absorb shocks. The Habsburg marital strategy was the opposite of that. It was a closed system designed for short-term gain, securing a throne, claiming a territory, with no regard for the long-term health of the organism itself. They optimized for power consolidation, and in doing so, introduced a fatal point of failure. It's a pattern you see beyond genetics. In business, a company that only promotes from within a narrow ideology loses its ability to innovate. In ecosystems, a lack of biodiversity leads to collapse. The Habsburgs are a stark, human example of a universal principle. Isolation is a precursor to extinction. So what are we left with? A pile of portraits in museums, where we can trace the unraveling of a dynasty in the line of a jaw. The Habsburg Jaw is more than a medical curiosity. It's a physical manifestation of a profound historical error. It's the price of choosing purity over vitality, of choosing blood over breath. They built their empire on the principle of noob, marry. And in the end, that very principle, taken to its narcissistic extreme, is what sealed their fate. They forgot that to build something that lasts, you need to open the doors, you need new energy, new ideas, new blood. Otherwise, you're just building a beautifully decorated vault and sealing yourself inside. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Empire Builders. If you found this story of dynasty and destiny compelling, please do share the show with a friend. It truly helps us grow. This is Ibnul J. Farabi for Light Knot Studios. Until next time, remember, history isn't just about what happened. It's about understanding the choices that led there. Visit us at lightknotstudios.com for more. Take care.